Well, my name is Fron Nahzi, and what I'm going to talk about today is how to write a concept paper, the first thing. And the second part was how to write a full-blown proposal. My suggestion is that I'll go through them, and then if there's anything that maybe you're not clear about, we can definitely address after, if you don't mind, the actual concept paper, the actual presentation. The reason why I say that is because the way concept papers and proposals are developed is like a jigsaw puzzle. Is one thing falls into another until you have a final document. And so let me just start by first a very simple process of how to write a concept paper. Now, the idea with the concept paper is, so what's the purpose of the concept paper? So this concept paper and the format, I've taken it and kind of meshed from various kind of potential donors, either the US government, the State Department, private foundations, and they basically use the same template, but they don't, unfortunately. But for the most part, when you write a concept paper, this is sort of what I'm presenting you now is the standard format. I don't want to say the generic version, but to a large extent, they all include the same components, and sometimes they just ask for it differently. Quite often, when they're asking for a concept paper, the donor, especially the US government, will tell you exactly how they want it. And that's usually found in the amendments, not in the actual proposal, but toward the end. And most of us who actually chase US government funding spend more time looking at the attachments of the request for proposal than we actually spend time reading the actual concept that they're looking for. So this whole thing is very simple. It's how to write a concept paper. And so what's the purpose of it, right? So it's really, it's a way for you to introduce your project to the donor. It's a really high level overview of just the main components of your proposal. As I said, it gets your foot in the door, allows donors to review your paper before you commit tremendous amount of time and effort in writing a whole-blown proposal. Sometimes what happens, they say, we like this idea, but can you expand this part? So it really helps in every way, especially if you're a small organization and you don't have the effort or the time to actually write a full-blown proposal. The other thing that you should be aware of that now more and more organizations, both in Europe and the United States, donors, are actually requesting concept papers before proposals. So that's fantastic for the NGO community. And the key to this, it really should be short. It should be no more than 3 pages, unless the donor says otherwise. And the other part, as I said earlier, you really should stick to the main ideas of what you're trying to say. So let me just go through it. I'm going to give you an example of something very silly, but I'll take you through the process of how a concept paper is written. So some of the common mistakes is one is really to understand what is the donor looking for. I can't tell you how often people submitted concept papers without actually looking to see if they're eligible or not. It may seem like the donor is interested in your particular case, but if you have to really sincerely read their criteria and eligibility before you think about submitting it. If you're not sure, I would highly recommend you email them or call them. Email is probably easier quite often. The other part is people don't really read the guidelines. As I said earlier, I'm going to say this over and over again, 99% of the donors will tell you exactly what they're looking for. And they'll tell you the format of it, and then we'll talk a little later why they do that. And then obviously the challenge here, especially here we are, this is a huge challenge. Most donors want the proposals in the English language. That is a challenge. But there's a way actually you can do that if we follow a basic structure. And that's our hope that this concept paper will do that. So let's start. Oh, what's going on? Okay. So as you can tell, you know, like everybody else, I'm saying like, I'm going to write a winning concept paper, right? Who's going to write a failing concept paper, right? So I kind of said a lot of this stuff. I said, you know, knowing what the donor wants, understanding what they're looking for, and making sure that your concept paper speaks to their criteria, not yours, theirs. As the old saying goes, we live in a donor-driven world. It really is. You have to make sure that you're complying to what their standards are and not our personal ones. So here's what we're going to do. This is the outline for the concept paper. One is the project overview. This is going to be an opening statement, a background, a proposed solution. As I said earlier, and even I footnoted here, the exact structure would vary according to the donor, right? And the last part will be the activities section, which will be the project goal, objective, activities, expected results. And I'll go through that for you in a second. Last part will be the institutional qualifications, which we'll call the key staff. You don't include everyone, just include your top 3 or 5 people, depending on that size of the project. And then we'll talk about how to describe your organization, what we call the quals for your organization, the institutional qualification, why you as an institution are capable of implementing this project. I put contact information there. I can't tell you enough how many times we received proposals where people forgot to put their contact information. The other thing most people forget is to put page numbers. And then we'll talk a little bit what happens when those grants come in and what happens to the grant review committee, why these little things are quite important. So let's start. So what I did was, knowing it's quite difficult to do a training over my proposal is here's the opening statement is really to teach chickens how to fly. So here's what I do. So Flightless Birds, a leading NGO on aerodynamics in chickens, will train chickens in New Jersey how to fly to provide protection and lengthen their lifespans. So if you notice my opening statement, I started immediately by introducing the organization. I want the reader or the people who are reviewing it to become as familiar with my organization, and you start literally building your reputation of that organization every chance you get. Do not use, in English we call the pronouns. Always use the name of the organization and the individual that will be responsible for it. Very important. My background statement. Because chickens don't know how to fly, they're at greater risk of being eaten by foxes. So in proposal writing, your background 99% of the time will go after you actually tell them what exactly you want to do. And usually your background should not be more than, literally speaking, a paragraph at most. We'll talk about in the full-blown proposal. Your background should be very, very short. The reason why people are giving you money is because they want to know what you plan to do with it. Not tell us about what happened. The other part is obviously, what is the solution to this problem? We will design and implement a 1-year training program to teach chickens in New Jersey how to fly, right? Now, the reason why I chose this, because it's a proposal. The proposal says, I believe I can make this happen. And I'm going to argue why I think this project is going to work. Now, you know very well, chickens don't know how to fly, but I'm going to train them along with my colleagues here. So that's a proposed solution, which I'm sorry, it came up right now. So here's the other parts of it now. This is the activities section. So for every single solution, for every single goal, an objective, which we'll talk a little later on about it, you have to have an activity that goes with it. So in this concept paper, my overall goal is to train chickens to fly so they can have a better life, for example. The objective for this particular concept paper is to establish a training program to teach chickens how to fly. Look at objectives as the mini goal leading to your overall goal. So you will have maybe 3 or 4 objectives or the mini goals that will lead to your overall goal of what you're trying to achieve. It's the best way to think about the objectives. So here's what I did here. So in my activities, I said training program. I label it so they know exactly what it is. And then I describe exactly what I will do there. I want to make sure to include the names I said earlier of every individual that's involved in the organization of the responsible for the given task. The reason why I say include the name of the organization, you may have other partners. You want to be able to introduce them as soon as possible that you have not only partner A, but also partner B. So they see that in fact it's well thought out of and that you're presenting it at all times clearly about who's going to do what. So I'm just reading very quickly. So the training program will be led by Dr. Doolittle. I immediately tell him who he is. He's a leading authority on flightless birds. He previously taught emus, it's a flightless bird in Australia, how to fly. And he will lead my team. This will be done by conducting both desk and field research, blah, blah, blah. I won't read the whole thing to bore you. You can see it that I think you have the translation. Let me go on the activity side. You don't need to go into great explanation. It really is, it's just saying, meaning you don't need to go, it shouldn't be a page, it should be a paragraph. For every objective, you're gonna have about a paragraph of describing your activity because you don't have much time there, and I'll show you at the end why. So this activity section continues and, whoops, did I jump over? Sorry. So we have the results. Now, it's very important. So we told them what the problem is. We told them what our objective of the mini goal is. We told them what our activity is, what we will do there. And now we will have to literally tell them what will the results of this activity be. For every single activity, you have to have a result. You have to tell them exactly how many people, for example, will be trained, what you think is the outcome. So the outputs, and we use these terms a lot, and we'll see it again. Output is really what will you produce? This is a number, meaning how many training programs, the number of trainings. The outcome is the level of performance or achievement that occurred because of the activity. So in this particular case, my output is 100 chickens trained to fly, 1 chicken flying curriculum developed. The outcome, which is the level of performance, I'm saying, predicting that 50% decrease in the number of reported chickens eaten by foxes. Later on, we will get into how we're going to measure that. But in the concept paper, we're just telling them, have a look at my paper, have a look at my idea, tell me if you like it, and then I can expand to answer all your other questions. So now we get into institute qualifications. So it's very critical that you highlight not your past works. You want to explain to the donor that you're capable of doing it. And the best way to do that is by highlighting any previous projects that you've worked on. And here, you shouldn't hold back. You should say that, you have more than, not only your personnel, but your institute qualifications, the number of years you've been working this thing, the publications you might have, especially if you're doing certain training. So in this particular case, I really highlight Dr. Doolittle. In most of the personnel, the usual line for your key people, let's say is Dr. Doolittle, you always try to include the number of years experience they've had in that particular sector. They've been doing this for example, Victor has been working in international development for 10 years and he's managed XY. Keep that in mind. Don't forget to include, especially if someone has a really, really strong track record. And again, what you're trying to do here is explaining to the donor. You're explaining to the donor that you have the capacity and the know-how to actually do this. The last part here is regarding the qualifications is your organization. it's again very similar to what I said before. It's not only you highlight what you've done, but really seriously highlight the donors that supported your previous projects. If you received money, for example, from Bill Gates Foundation, what that sends is a clear sign to the other donor that says, hey, they know the process. It really is a credibility. It's saying these individuals were trusted by another one. I can trust them also to do that kind of work. So the more kind of donors, even if it's a small grant, even if it's a $500 grant, or if it's $1 million or more, always make sure in the institutional qualification, highlight the fact that you did receive support from a previous donor. And last but not least is really your contact information. Now, the concept paper, seriously, is a very simple thing. The reason why most people get it wrong is because they don't have the template or the format to follow it. And so if you only have 3 pages, one of the things that you want to look at is how do we actually make sure that you use all 3 pages to its fullest. Quite often, on the top of the page, and if it says only 3 pages, they ask you to also place the name of the organization. They want you the title. They want how long it is. Rather than doing that in a separate paragraph, just create a small little chart on top as I did. You see a little matrix, because you want to give yourself as much space as possible for the real substance of the proposal. I've seen concept papers where people spend 1 paragraph telling me what the name of the organization is, or why the project title, how much money they need. That comes in the second part of it, which is when you're invited to do a whole proposal. So typically speaking, this is what a concept paper would look like. And this would be the last page. Okay, so we just went through the concept paper, and there are a few things in the concept paper that will overlap with the actual proposal. So the assumption is our concept paper was so nice that they now invited us for a full-blown proposal. So again, we went through this. What I did with this proposal and the components, as I said in the concept paper, I took the various components from the federal government, State Department, private foundations, and said, let me just include it into one course, which is the one we're doing now, the training. So that way, at least you become familiar with whatever kind of request that they ask for, which we're going to go through. So what I'm going to do in this particular one is a little bit more different. Is I'm going to spend some time defining you what they mean by certain terms, and then giving you examples. And just bear with it. It's going to take a little while because this one here is a full-blown proposal, which probably mirrors, and some of you who've actually worked on USAID projects will realize that in fact it comes very close to what you've seen as a USAID proposal. In fact, it includes almost every component that you'll find in a USAID proposal. From all the proposals you ever see, either from the European Commission or from private foundations, USAID proposals have seen to a large extent have taken almost everything that's included in those proposals that you'll see in these other places into their structure. So without any further ado, let me just start. So this is really about how do I propose it. And most of the stuff we went over, but it's really, again, I mean, it's understanding some of the key components. I promise you, we're not going to get it this first time or during this training, but the objective here is at least you have a template to work from, and at least it gives you a roadmap about what they mean by certain terms. Proposal writing, as many training courses as you want to attend, really it's done by doing. So I just want to make that very clear. It's not like you're going to walk away from this and say, hey, I can write a proposal now. So again, as I said before, one of the biggest challenges and common mistakes is most people seriously do not read what the grant maker wants. What are their priorities? Be careful here. Just because a donor may actually work on projects maybe related to sustainability one year, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do the same thing next year. Please always read and make sure you understand what the priorities are. The other thing is, again, if you're not sure, Greatest thing in the world, send an email. Try to establish a relationship with your potential donor. And as far as if there is a proposal guidelines, most donors will tell you what those guidelines are. They'll also include a template for you and say, this is the format we wanted it. Very important that you actually stick to that template. And we'll talk about that later, why that's so important and what happens in the grant review committees. And then the biggest challenge, as we said, even in the previous section, is how do you provide that information clearly? The big mistake here is quite often we have a habit of going way too deep into background. When you have to remember, and I admit this is, and I hate to say it this way, a proposal is telling you not what is paying you or willing to give you money, not on what happened in the past, but what you're proposing to do in the future. It's a proposal. You're always looking for the future. Less on background and always thinking about how that money will be used to improve the future. So again, it's always a winning grant proposal, right? So I kind of covered most of this stuff. As I said earlier, boy, they really do have a way of telling you what they want and what they look for. And if the US government and the European Commission will also give you a scorecard and tell you, this is how we will score your proposal. They'll look at the actual proposal, they'll look at your personnel, for example. And then one of the other key things that they'll look at is the measurement and evaluation plan, which I'll discuss at the end of this, which is part of this proposal training. So keep that in mind when you're looking at you're about to write your proposal. Go in the back, figure out what they're looking for, and you'll give and take. You're not going to score 100 points, but you know for a fact that some areas you're going to be weaker and stronger in. So as I said earlier, so here's what I've done here is really on a sense of what this concept or this proposal could be applicable to. It's the training includes like for governments, foundations, corporations. Quite often the application process is what they call request for assistance or request for proposals. As I said earlier, they will give you a template on how they want the proposal to look like. There are also unsolicited proposals, meaning if you're in your country and you're seeing a donor working on a particular project and you think that's not being done the way it should, you have the ability to submit an unsolicited proposal. I would strongly encourage you, rather than submitting a full-blown 30-page proposal, submit a concept paper. Say, hey, look, I know you're doing this project, but here's a concept of how to improve it. The chances for funding for that are not that great because quite often already sort of the money has been earmarked, especially if it's a government funding program. But there's always a chance, especially with the private donors. So I kind of, I started there, but I'm not going to get into that because we're not going to touch at the moment. And then again, as far as the last part is, I can't stress enough, make sure that you're eligible. Especially with USAID or the State Department and the European Commission, they will let you know if what NGO from what country is eligible to apply for this. And if that's the case where, for example, maybe they want a US-based organization to take lead or a European-based organization to lead, one of the things that you should always think about, which you probably do anyways, is to partner with these organizations. Because most organizations who are working overseas, either the United States or Europe, are always looking for local partners. And we'll talk about that after we're done with the proposal on how to write it. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you through the entire proposal, which there are a few issues that, as I said earlier, that overlap with the concept paper. In this particular case, I'll describe each section. And then if there's something that's confusing that you're like completely lost, please stop me and we can talk about a specific section there. But so very quickly, in this, we will go over the cover page, the acronyms, the executive summary. If you notice, the executive summary actually comes first. It's the last thing that we'll do. It's usually done literally after you've written the entire proposal. And you'll see that as an example. And then the first section will be the technical approach, which will include the problem statement, purpose and main objectives. It'll also include the project activities, project results and deliverables, your team, your timelines, who's going to benefit from your project, the project risks, and project sustainability, meaning how will the project continue long after the funding has dried up? Okay, here we go. This is going to be a little bit taken, but just bear with it, I promise you. So there they are. For the most part, these are the components you'll find in every single kind of, how do you call, RFA or RFP. Some will have more, some will have less, but I assure you they'll include these things. The last section, which are actually very important, will be your annexes or your attachments, which are normally your budget, your project monitoring evaluation plan. And I'll show you 2 examples of that. And then again, it's your organization background and the key staff resumes. And I'll talk about that, about what you're supposed to do there. So here it is, a problem statement. So your problem statement should be understood by a person who knows little of anything about your subject matter. I always tell people, pretend like you're describing it, pretend like you're talking to a taxi driver. And if you can't, try to explain to the taxi driver, what is the problem that you're looking at? It should be really that simple. Now, the reason why it's that important is because grant review applications are reviewed by a panel. And usually it's like 5, 7, 13, it's an odd number. And not everyone on that grant review committee understands your subject matter or your issue. So you want to speak to your experts, but you also want to speak to those individuals who are not very familiar with it. So use very, very simple language, very simple language. Usually in English, I always tell people, look at the way Hemingway wrote. Hemingway wrote very short sentences, got his point across, and that was it. There was nothing fancy about it. In the English language was that, it's really is keep it very, very simple. And make sure when you're writing it, think about the person on the other side who's never heard about your project before. Don't make the assumption they know it. So here's my problem statement. This is just an example. Again, I'll go back to using the issue of chickens. Because chickens in New Jersey don't know how to fly, they're at greater risk of being eaten by foxes. So now I talk a little bit more about it. In the past 2 years, New Jersey farmers have reported an increase in foxes attacking chickens. Oh boy. Without the ability to fly the coop, the chickens are easy prey for the foxes. Now I introduce my organization. Flightless Birds is uniquely qualified. And you should say that. If you are uniquely qualified, say it. To address the problem. Established in 1952, Flightless Birds has trained more than 1,000 birds to fly. Flightless Birds team is comprised of leading animal, bird, and aerodynamic experts with decades experience in successful training birds across the globe to fly. A 12-month program will train chickens throughout New Jersey how to fly. Here it is, straightforward. So if I was in a taxi cab and it says, what's going on? I guess what's happening with the chickens, they're being eaten by foxes. Why? Because unfortunately they know how to fly. What are you gonna do about it? We've been doing it for years. We know how to do this. We're gonna teach you how to fly. Simple as that. I said it very fast, sorry about it. Let's go on to the next section. So now, here's where we get into the thick of things, we would say. So in most projects now, almost everyone across the board, including institutions, which we'll talk about later on in another training, require now a theory of change. And this is quite simple, in fact. It just answers the question, what you do. Who are you targeting for results? Why and how do you do it? It completes the sentence in English is that if we do X, then I will change. Then Y will change, excuse me. And there's assumptions here. For each one of these, you have to have assumptions, which you will actually include in there, which says, so some everyday assumptions, for example, are if I turn the faucet on, water will come out, meaning if X happens, then will Y really be the result? So I know this is a little kind of like what in the world is, but it's actually very simple. Always just remember, it really is about, it answers a simple question. If I do X, then Y will happen. So So here's my example as far as when it comes to my project. My theory changed for my chicken project. If we train chickens to fly, right, then they were able to fly and escape from being eaten by foxes. And what are my assumptions? Chickens are birds and have the physical capabilities to fly. Flying when they're able to escape from being eaten by foxes. There are no other barriers preventing them from escaping. It's very important, in fact, that you always have a theory of change. Because what you're telling the donor is that, in fact, that you've thought about this and you've also looked at all the assumptions that you're making in order to make this happen. So, go on. Then we have the purpose and objective. Purpose and objective of the project. It describes the overall purpose, specific objectives, and impact results of the project, so achieving the proposed solution. As I said before, think of your objectives. I'm sorry, I keep doing this. Think of your objectives and your purpose as mini goals, and the purpose is the long-term goal. So in my particular case here, the purpose is a broad goal, which I said before, which is impossible to achieve, which is during this entire proposal. It's a long-term goal that your institution, your organization has. So here is I want to train chickens how to fly so they can enjoy all the benefits of being a regular bird, whatever that means, right? And then as far as when I create my objectives, and I apologize, we use these English acronyms, SMART, but it really should be something very specific. Think of it as, again, it's an objective, it's something that is a mini goal leading to your long-term goal. You should be able to measure it. And one of the things that you're going to find, especially if you're working in a group of people writing this, you have to agree upon what these goals should be. It should be realistic, and you should have a time. You really somewhat say it will be done in X time, and then I'll show you where that goes in. But quite often when you're writing objectives, you write your objective, and then afterwards, when you're writing your activities, you write, for example, what the outcome will be. You can say at the bottom in what time frame this will be accomplished in. It will be accomplished in the first month of the project, in the 6th month, or in the end of the year. So in my example here is that, that the assumption is it's going to be all done. I'll establish a program to train chickens in New Jersey who are at the risk of being eaten by foxes. That's one objective. I'll prepare a strategic paper on further development of this course. I'll provide students with practical experience working as chicken flight instructors. And I'll increase the qualifications of lecture of teaching on how chickens to fly. These are all objectives, which then what I would do then afterwards is literally have activities for each one of these objectives. So on my project activities, project activities, again, identify the specific tasks need to be done to produce the project's objectives and project results. Right? So include information about the key stakeholders, communication strategy with key stakeholders, people who benefit from it, information on existing or planned partnerships. This is, again, what I was saying earlier, it's very important that you name the organizations, the individuals, including your partners that are involved in it. You want to demonstrate that, in fact, these activities are being done by a team, if that's the case. If it's being done just only by your organization, say so. And if it's being done by various people in your organization, use their names, include it in the proposal. So what many people do is to include activities directly under the objectives. And it's hard to see in the PowerPoint, but you'll see at the end. So the idea here is we found that this method where you actually have the activities right underneath the objective, it's much easier for the grant review committees to look at it. And again, I'll talk about the structure later on, but let me just go through this. So in this particular case, my objective is to establish a program to train chickens in New Jersey who are at the risk of being eaten by foxes to fly. Activity 1, research, will be led by Dr. Doolittle. Well, again, as I described, he is a leading authority. He's going to be able to do this. And I describe what kind of research and how he'll do it. I'll have activity 2 is develop a training program. And then again, I would describe there, for example, who's going to develop that training program. Dr. Doolittle and other people. Then activity 3, we'll have a test. Buzz Lightfoot, right? This person will lead the testing, and I describe why he's capable of doing it in one sentence. You'll have more information about these key people towards the end of your proposal, but it's really important when you say this is that you include just 1 or 2 words describing why these individuals are qualified to do that. You just can't say Dr. Doolittle will do this. People are going to ask the question, well, who is this guy? That's why it's very important to say 1 word. 30 years experience of doing this, he's capable of doing that. Although the focus here is on the activity. So these are your. So the project results and deliverables. So this is, again, we have to demonstrate what's going to come out of all this. And the tangible and non-tangible products of the project activities. So project results should be derived directly from the project activities. As I said before, for each activity, you should have project result. Remember, each project result should be supported with relevant evidence. So from the expected project results that I have here is I'll have a 1 training program in chicken flying developed, 5 trainings were implemented, which will result in 50% increase in the number of chickens that attempt to fly. So for each activities, you want to have at least 1, 2, or 3 what we call expected results. And you'll see how that comes in at the later when we do the measurement evaluation plan. So as I said here, it's very important for each activity you have to have an output or an outcome. Now, I kind of gave you what the output and the outcome is before, but let me go over this because really, seriously, it's quite confusing. And I know it took me a while to understand. So an output is what will you produce? But trainings, right? Training program. The outcome is the level of performance or achievement that occurred because of the activity or services you organize. In this particular case, my outcome I'm saying is that we'll have a 50% increase in the number of chickens that attempt to fly. You don't have to answer the question now how we actually will measure this, because we'll do that at the measurement evaluation plan, which I said at the beginning of this is a very key component to the entire proposal. So here we come with the project team. This is where you really, where you list the names of personnel who will be directly involved in the project, and you include short bios. Please do not include your entire team. I've had proposals where people included also the bios of the driver and the doorman. No, this is just your key 3 to 5 key people that are responsible for the project. You usually should include the project manager and then your key experts, your subject matter experts that are responsible for implementing it. Try to limit that to just the most senior people that are responsible for it. And the bio should be extremely short in this particular section here. It should be a paragraph. The reason for that is you'll see later on, because for more information, you will attach a resume to it. When the actual proposal, limit it to 1 really paragraph. And as I said before, when you're describing your project team, really highlight any previous projects they worked on that are similar to this, highlight their years of experience. We've gone through this already once, so I'm not going to read it again. Make sure that obviously, highlight their language skills if that's an issue. Or for example, they worked in a particular region or a particular town that they're focusing on. It's things like this. Don't go into great detail that you have to go in and say they have a master's or a PhD, unless it actually speaks directly to the project. If the PhD or the education speaks directly to the project, then definitely highlight it. But if the project has nothing to do with your degree, don't worry about that. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to tell them why you have the ability to implement the project. And one of the key things that they'll look at is not only obviously your experience, but the fact that you have a track record in doing similar projects in the past. So one other part of it here is what we call the project activities and timeline. And so every organization, especially the US government, is going to require you to submit an activities chart and a project timeline. And this, again, it really almost summarizes your entire proposal. So it will indicate each project activity in a separate row, along with the dates when the activities will actually take place. So for example, you have this here. You have on one side, you have the activities, which is research, develop training program tests. On the other side, months. Keep it to months. You don't have to be weekly. Which the idea is they just want to see how you've spread out and managed the timeline for it. So those, let's say it's a 2-year program. Again, keep it to just monthly. The key here is obviously that you want to demonstrate that this actually coordinates very well with what you had proposed to do in the activity section. The activity section, you will say sometimes you would include what time of year, what month this is going to start in. Sometimes some people just say, I'm going to do that later on. I'll just include it in my timeline. So each one of your activities here, your timeline should look quite completed. You don't want to leave any months that are blank where nothing is happening. And again, this is really where who's going to benefit from it. The question was asked before about location. This is really important right here, is where you describe, for example, the donor gets a chance to see about how many people and who's going to benefit from it. And really, it's very important that you break this down, not only as far as the number of people, but the type of people, the number of women, the number of minorities, the age. As much information as you could possibly provide will be extremely helpful, especially if you can break it down. And then the key here is, especially if you can just say how each of these groups will benefit from this project, each one either the same or differently. And again, one of the things you should do is always name the towns and the cities or the villages or where you are, that will also where the project will take place. And especially for those who maybe are not familiar with Russia, you should definitely say that if you're working outside of Moscow, say so people get a pretty good idea that you're 100 kilometers away from Moscow versus 20 kilometers outside of Moscow. So individuals get a very clear idea that in fact that you're working in some of the areas that have been neglected for one reason or another. So here's an example. The immediate benefits of this project will be chickens. Obviously, that's what we're working with. Chicken farmers in New Jersey. Purdue is a huge company that produces chickens here. And local national governments, poultry agencies, and others, right? Animal rights organizations are developing conducting programs to protect chickens from being eaten by foxes. The project's training program and its analysis will provide information for other cases across the country. Now I'm telling them, hey, look, if you give me this, I'll actually be able to help other organizations and other across the US. The project will track diversity of project's beneficiaries in terms of gender, age, and location. To help the project correct its course, if needed, we will proactively reach out to women and youth. So one of the things that I want to do here is I'm going to say, look, I want to make sure that you understand that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that those groups that are normally left out of trainings, women and youth, in other cases, we will proactively look out to make sure and give them priority to attend the training. Oops, sorry. So one of the other things that you're going to see quite often, and now more so than ever, is really you also have to provide them with a project risk. Donors want to work with organizations, understand the risks, and that they have a plan on how they will respond to them. So you have to explain not only both external and internal problems that you think will hinder the project. You should really try to be very honest about this. And you'll see on the next slide about how the format that we use. But you should elaborate how your organization responds to these potential problems. What you're doing here is that don't think for a second that if I highlight a problem and I don't have an answer for it, that I may be done. No, highlight the problem and you give your best idea about how you think you'll deal with that. There's a very good chance that people on the grant review committee will look at this, and if you haven't included one of the obvious risks to it, that maybe the project can be shut down, for example, that they're going to say they're not being, that they haven't really thought this out. So in the project risk here, as an example, quite often it's presented in a chart form. Normally it's only one page. Try to stick to just the key major issues that you think can hinder your project. So here, for example, what I have here is refusal of chicken farmers to participate. It happens all the time. There's a good chance that the people that you thought will be working on your project simply don't want to. So what happened was the impact is the inability to fulfill objective of chicken farmers at risk. So meaning I can't train them. So how am I going to respond to that? So I'm going to increase support to cooperating farmers, identify new creative approaches to reach out to other farmers. It sounds so logical and common sense that you're saying, what's the big deal? But they want to see the fact that you've been thinking about this and that you have a strategy how you're going to counter it. Another risk to this project I use as an example is the project team cannot achieve all objectives within the project duration. Simply didn't have enough time. And the project collapses and chickens remain at risk. So how would I actually counter that? I'll actually have systematically review the implementation status and adjust if necessary the project approach. That means I'll come in and I'm always looking at the project going, hey, is this working or not? Do we need to make any adjustments? Begin at least 5 months prior to the completion of the project to seek additional funds if required to complete the project implementation. So if something happens, I'm going to actually have a strategy for finding additional funding. So think about this. Usually it's one page normally. People don't want to go beyond that. But it's very critical that you demonstrate that you understand the risk and that you actually have an idea on how to counter this. So the sustainability part here is donors want to know the fact that investment is not what they call one and done. That the proposal and your project will continue long after the life of this grant. So a strong proposal will demonstrate that you have a plan for how the project will continue long after this project. Quite often, it's great to say that your funding will allow me to continue, or as a seed grant, I don't, but you want more than that, that will continue this project for years to come. And that's really something that the donors will love to highlight, saying that, if possibly, although they say that we'd like to actually fund it once and move on to another organization, they love to work with organizations that have a strategy about how they can become self-sustainable. Self-sustainable means that you're not really relying on their money, that you also have other sources as well. It's not only one donor. So here is explain how the expertise gained as a result of this project and project teams will be used and applied in the future. And does your organization plan to continue working in this direction? If so, say so. And that also in there, you may want to tell them that you're also looking at potential other donors. So here's the example I provide here. So the project's flying curriculum we've made available to poultry organizations, universities, and farmers across the country. We also propose to expand the program to other states by seeking additional funding from both US government, grant-giving institutions, named funding program, and such major foundations as Gates, Ford, whatever. So here what I'm trying to tell them is that everything I've done for you, and the outputs of this, the training programs and those, I will give to other universities and other institutions. So you're getting more for your money. I'm not going to keep it to myself. And at the same time, I might actually have a plan that, in order to continue this, I will also reach to other donors. Doesn't mean that you can't reapply to them. What you're just telling them is that you're actually thinking about and you have a strategy. Oops. So here now we're going to do the annexes. So the budget, the project monitoring evaluation plan, and I can't tell you enough how important these attachments are to quite often and how the projects are evaluated. So on the budget side, quite often they will actually give you a budget template. Please use the template that they give you. If they don't give you a budget template, it's very easy to find budget templates online. If you can't find one, just email me. I'll send you one that has all the formulas plugged in, and all you have to do is just plug in your numbers. Now, federal government, the US government, 99% of the time, they're going to give you the template. The European Commission will also do that. Some private donors saying, you submit your own budget. And if that's the case, again, look at the most essential. Now, one of the things that I don't know if you guys have or not, depending on that, you have what they call, especially with US government, the indirect rate, which allows you to charge a certain percentage of the total of your project that will literally cover costs that are not associated directly with your project. I know that sounds confusing, but in the question and answer session, maybe we could go into great detail, but let me just move on here. So one of the things that quite often here with the people forget is the importance for every single budget cost, for every single line, you have to have a narrative. You have to describe what that cost is. If someone is taking a trip, and even though it says they're, we're taking, asking for an airline flight or whatever, in the budget narrative, just include that saying one flight at $500, one round trip. And it's simple as that, but it's very important that you have at least one narrative line for every single one of your costs. So in this particular case, when I describe, for example, the salaries, the cost for Dr. Doolittle, I tell him I budget him for 12 months, and I tell him what he will do. I also include there, which a lot of donors will allow you to do, because especially if it's a long project, that you will also offer an increase in this salary. And you just tell them what year. So for example, this was done in 2017. So you can say, for example, in 2022, based on our policies, we will increase his salary by 5%, which is reflected in the actual budget proposal that you submitted to the donor. The same thing with the other personnel. You can turn around, you can say that we're going to budget this person for only 9 months, and this is the cost that will be for it. But make sure that you spell this out. So here's the one that I was going to really, if there's one thing that not enough attention is paid to, that just is a major factor in every single proposal, more and more now, is the measurement evaluation plan. This literally summarizes almost what the donor is getting for their money, cost-benefit analysis in the sense of various indicators. So the MBE is one of the most important components of the proposal. It provides clear data. What is the donor getting for their money? The measurement evaluation is done in a table format, which sometimes a donor provides. In the case of the US government, they will give you a template, and you just have to fill it in, and we'll show you what it looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two templates. One is a very simple one that some private donors use, and then the second one a bit more complicated, more expanded, what you'll probably see at the European Commission or the USAID or the State Department. So the M&E table each include the objectives, include what they call the relevant indicator, and I'll explain that in a second, the baseline and target. So an indicator is a quantitative or qualitative measure to describe whether the intended results have occurred and show that the project objectives have been reached. I know that sounds like a lot of wording, but let's go through the example, and it's much easier. And then, as I said before, it needs to include the objective, which is, we talked about, which is the main goal, the baseline, it's existing information about the problem and issue of concern. It'll make more sense when we see the actual table, how this works. And then the target, what exactly you're looking to do. All right, so I know this makes sense now, but let's go through the table very quickly. So this is the simple one here. Let me make sure I have the right one here. So this here just gives you the objective, which is designed a program to teach chickens in New Jersey who are at risk from being eaten by foxes to fly. That's one of my objectives. The indicator is how I'm going to measure training in teaching chickens to fly and the number of participants. So my indicator is saying how many trainings and participants. That's my indicator. My baseline is 0, meaning there have been 0 trainings on teaching chickens how to fly in New Jersey, because it speaks to New Jersey, okay? No trainings have been done on how to teach chickens to fly. So quite often, most of your, unless you have certain data, your baseline about your project will probably be 0 because no one else has done it. Or if they've done it and you're building on it, you should provide evidence in saying, currently 20 people in this town, for example, have been trained, but we will train an additional 50. You can say that. Why? Because obviously it's been working and you want to build on it. What's your target there? Well, in this particular case, as we indicated, my target for this project is really to develop one training program, and I want to have 1,000 participants that take part in my training. In your case, you can do the same thing. Let's say your baseline that you actually trained already 20 people, but you're asking for more money to train the 50. Your target would be 50 people. So total will be 70. And your participants, you can say, will go from, the number of participants will go from 20 to 50. And your total will be 70, for example, that participated in your project. So this is a simple format. The more complicated one really expands it, and it goes back to what I talked earlier on, I keep mentioning, is these things called outputs and outcomes. Again, the output is what you produce. The outcome is the level of performance. And in the USAID, they will actually require you, or the State Department, to submit a much more comprehensive, expanded version of the emergent evaluation plan. So key here is the data source. So the emergent evaluation will also ask you how frequently you will conduct the monitoring. So one of the columns here that's missing that you can include is obviously how often. So let me just take you through this. So the objective, design a program to teach chickens in New Jersey how to fly. I have two indicators: farmers trained to teach chickens to fly, meaning how many farmers were, and the number of training participants. So my first one is the outcome. And my source will be sources, who's gathering that data. You don't, unless you have some money, unless you have, depending on what it, quite often you and your partners will gather this data. And you just note that. If it's in this particular case, we will actually gather that data, flightless birds. And most people who submit the emergent evaluation plans, they literally note that their project manager, or if the funding allows, that you actually hired someone that does nothing at all but help with gathering this data. But quite often it's literally done by the implementing organization. And then you talk here about disaggregated data, which is data is broken down to segments, which I said earlier. It's very important here that they look for diversity, especially not only in the sense of the people who are participating, but also as far as, where the target regions or cities or villages. One of the things everyone looks to see is, can we get away a little bit from the urban centers where a lot of focus has been for the last 20, 30 years. And then the last part is that I tell them exactly how many participants will actually take place. I say 1,000 participants, as I said earlier. So the only thing that's missing on here, one of the issues that's missing, is that how frequently will this be done? Quite often, you can put in there about when you do the data source, right underneath the data source where I have the disaggregated by gender, location, you can put in there that this will be done monthly, quarterly, biannually, or at the end of the year. It's very important that they know that. So the organizational background, again, we went over this, but I want to make sure, I can't stress enough here again, is about talking about really past funding or past projects funded by organizations, because you're looking to establish credibility. Now, we will talk in the fundraising strategy later on, but quite often in some of the large grants, the grants are made to the institutional qualifications and not the individual, meaning that in USAID, they're less interested about who the individuals and their expertise, and more about the institution and their experience in developing and implementing similar projects. So some of the basic information you want to include about your institutional background, your organizational background is when it was founded, your mission, your profile, the number of staff. It's very important that you actually note this, so they want to see that you have to be able to manage this. What is your annual operating budget? And the description of your main partnerships and projects. So in my particular case, here's what I did. Flightless Bird, founded in 1952, is the preeminent NGO of bird and aerodynamics, blah, blah, blah. Flightless has a long, successful track record in studying and helping flightless birds across the globe to fly. In 2018, Flightless Birds received a $3 million grant from Gates Foundation to train emu in Sydney, Australia to fly. Flightbirds had qualified staff as comprised of 3 full-time administrators and 3 full-time researchers and trainers. That's it. Nothing more complicated than that. You don't have to go into all the other personnel staff that you have, just the main ones. So, as I said before, one of the things that you're going to do is you're going to have a short bio for each one of your key people. You'll also attach your resumes, and your resumes really should speak to the project proposal. I've seen so many resumes where someone just took a resume that they've actually submitted, I don't know, for a job somewhere and just attach it to it. You try to massage the resume so it aligns with what you're proposing in the project, because they will look at the resume very closely. As I said quite often, on your bio, whatever you write on the bio, in the short bio that we talked about before about your key people, it should be reflected in greater depth at the resume section. So at the end, you're going to have your cover page. And here's the problem most people make. This is where we literally sit there and we actually have to write the executive summary. We've completed the entire proposal. And usually the executive summary, as you know, is probably about a page at max. An executive summary really should do that. The summary of the entire proposal, highlighting the major components of it. And it should speak directly to what the donor is looking for. So in this particular case, it's very simple. Flightless Birds proposes to design a 1-year program so they know how long it is. To teach chickens where, they know exactly the location. To do what? Who are at risk of being eaten by foxes, to fly. Because they don't know how to fly, they're at greater risk. In the past 5 years, there's been an increase in foxes attacking chickens. Now I'm telling you one of the factors is because chickens cannot outrun the foxes and because they don't know how to fly. We have assembled an incredible team of leading bird and aerodynamic experts to solve the flying problem. I mentioned my key people, Dr. Doolittle, world famous, and Buzz Lightworks, aerodynamics. This program will increase chickens to attempt to fly, decrease the number of reported chickens eaten by foxes, develop chicken flying curriculum to be used in trains across the US. This then becomes your first page. So how does the whole proposal look like? You have the title, you have your contact information, you have your table of contents, you have your acronyms, very important if you use acronyms, make sure you have that in there. So my executive summary, which I just read to you, followed by my entire proposal. And make sure, please, you label it as such: problem statement, purpose, project activities, project results and deliverables, the team. This is my activities and timeline that we just discussed. This is my project beneficiaries. I talked about who's going to benefit from it. This is a summary of the risks, how we think the project will continue long after the funding is done, my budget narrative. The only problem here is the key stuff. So I will stop there. Thank you so much. I hope I still have